Dosh, Himosh, Ukner, Yata. Give me Genesis. Hey all, this video is going to be another Star Trek retrospective, and in it, I'm going to talk about my first lessons, well, actually, my only lessons learning Klingon, and those come from Commander Krug and friends from Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Hey all, before I jump into this retrospective, I have a request from this side of the camera. Please smash the like button and also consider subscribing to the channel if you are not subscribed. And now on to our feature presentation. Hey everyone, welcome back to Big Discussions 76, Entertainment and Media. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar. I am the content creator on this channel. And well, over here, I talk about all things media. Not a lot recently. Things have been very, very busy, but I wanted to come back and create another Star Trek retrospective. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my first lessons and my only lessons learning Klingon. Now, this isn't my only Star Trek retrospective. There are several on my channel, and thank you to those Trekkies and other curious souls who supported those videos. I'm going to date myself. I am, or should I say I was, a mid-70s baby. So that means I grew up with, to some degree, the Star Trek original TV series and the movies featuring the original cast: Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, Uhura, Chekhov, Scotty, and Sulu. I think that's all of them. In any case, yeah, so I grew up watching the reruns. So I've made content here on Beale and Lokai, and I believe I have a video on the Planet Eater. I have to look back at my catalog to see if it's there. And also I made a retrospective on Kirstie Alley's Lieutenant Savick and the Probe. I believe there's a video in my library about the Probe from Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. So I have a vast, or should I say a vast part of my childhood was spent watching the reruns and also consuming the movies. And since I'm dating myself again, since I was born in the mid-70s, I missed the motion picture when it first came out. I'm thinking about the director. Oh, it's escaping me right now. Who directed that first motion picture with Ilea and Lieutenant Decker and V'ger? It'll come to me. Robert Wise. I believe it's Robert Wise. So I missed that, and I had to watch the first movie later. We did have a mug with the refit Enterprise, my favorite Enterprise, and Kirk, McCoy, and Spock on it, and Decker and Ilea. We had a coffee mug. I remember that growing up in Buffalo. But the movies that I spent the most time watching as a young person were Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek III, which, they say that 2, 3, and 4, they're all the same story, just one after the other. And then Star Trek V and Star Trek VI, those are separate, just like Star Trek the Motion Picture, that's separate. But 2, 3, and 4, those all go together, kind of like the Lord of the Rings. In any case, we had Star Trek II and Star Trek III on VHS. See, I'm dating myself. We had the VHS. And those were early 80s movies. So I was in grade school, transitioning into middle school. And believe me when I say that I watched those movies ad nauseum. I watched The Wrath of Khan ad nauseum, and I dreamed about being on that Enterprise. That is my favorite Enterprise, the refit NCC-1701, the one that Decker, Captain Decker, Commander Decker, Chief Executive Officer Decker, the one that he refit and the one that Kirk snatched away. That was my favorite Enterprise. So I watched Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. As a matter of fact, I remember going to see that at the theater, and I watched it over and over and over again. The same thing is true for Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. We had the VHS. The lettering was blue and black. For Star Trek II, the lettering was red and gold, I believe. And I watched those movies over and over and over and over again. And when you watch a movie over and over and over again, what happens is you start to know all of the scenes, you start to know all of the characters, but you also start to know and memorize the lines. And that's exactly what happened with Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. I watched that movie so much that even to this day, I remember the lines, the human lines, and even the Klingon lines. Were there Vulcan lines in that movie? I think there were some Vulcan lines in that movie, but the Klingon lines, the Klingons, as I'll describe, they were featured in that movie. And I think that was the first time that was a deep dive into the Klingons, because we, in the TV series, we saw Klingons that looked more human than they did the modern Klingons with the half balding heads and the ridges and the eyebrows. But on the old series, they spoke English. And in the motion picture, we get a small glimpse of the Klingons at the beginning of the movie when they're attacking V'ger, and the only word we hear them say is "bah," which is fire. Okay, that was pretty much the only word. But Star Trek III: The Search for Spock gave us a nice deep dive into the Klingons, and we heard them speak and conversate and socialize with each other for the first time. And watching that movie over and over and over again, I learned to speak some Klingon. Now, in this current station of my life, I do have a renewed interest in learning foreign languages. When I was a youngster, I learned a little bit of French. And then through the years, I had some Spanish. Okay. And I'm going to be discreet here. I'm usually discreet in my YouTube content. I won't say which one I'm interested in right now. But historically, when you learn a foreign language, you have a teacher, right? We have all of these technologies today, all of these apps like Duolingo that arguably remove the need for a teacher, though teachers are still helpful. But anytime historically, when you would learn a foreign language, you would have a teacher. And so my teachers for Klingon were from Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. Those were Commander Krug, played by Christopher Lloyd; Torg, played by Stephen Liska; Maltz, played by John Larroquette; the Gunners, Bob K. Cummings and Branscombe Richmond; and finally Valkyris, played by Catherine Sharif or Catherine Sheriff. I'm not sure which one it was, but these were my first Klingon teachers. I'm sure they didn't know that they were teaching me and other young kids Klingon, but they were, and those are the lines I'm going to highlight in this video. Now, before I jump into those scenes that I and probably you know all so well, I feel the need to pay tribute to Christopher Lloyd, who was the head Klingon, the leading Klingon, and the villain in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. So this is going to be brief, but he's a brilliant actor. I believe he's still here, but Christopher Lloyd has a tremendous body of work. He is most known for playing Jim Ignatowski in Taxi. So he was a part of that gang. He's probably most known for playing Dr. Emmett Brown in the Back to the Future trilogy. He also played in the Addams Family remake, I believe, and I believe he played Uncle Fester. I should have looked that up before making this video, but I do remember seeing him dressed up as Uncle Fester in that film, in that remake. But his brilliance, Christopher Lloyd's brilliance, is his hallmark is the raspy voice, but it's also his demeanor, his energy, his twitchiness, his animatedness. Oh, I just thought of another one. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? He was the judge. He was the judge who turned out to be a tune himself. Anyway, but it's his physical acting, okay, and his range. So Christopher Lloyd always brought a unique skill set to any role that he played. And as Commander Krug, he was very much like Captain Ahab, I believe, hunting the white whale. In this instance, his white whale was Genesis. I believe Captain Ahab is the right reference. And forgive me if he isn't. With the busy life, there's not time to do all the research. But the object of his desire was Genesis and the Genesis plans. And he played Commander Krug with that scratchy and raspy voice. He played it with intensity. He played it with, he was very, very animated and twitchy. And the way that he sat at his captain's chair on his bird of prey, well, then it was his bird of prey, he sat elevated from his men. So all of his men sat at his feet. His lieutenant, his right-hand man, Torg, was by his side, always advising him and taking over the ship when he was beaming away. And then there was Maltz, played by John Larroquette from Night Court, who was kind of I want to say the flunky, but Maltz wasn't the flunky. He was what was Maltz? Well, he had enough cachet to sit with Torg and Commander Krug when they were going over the Genesis presentation by Captain Kirk. But he was, let's just say Maltz was the third in charge. So anyway, that's a brief introduction and a nod to Christopher Lloyd and the other Klingons in the movie. And with that, let me jump into the scenes and the footage, the parts of the movie where I received my first lessons in Klingon and speaking Klingon. Prayer, Mr. Savick. Klingons don't take prisoners. Yeah, so all of these scenes were brilliantly acted. Now, Leonard Nimoy did direct this film, and I think he directed part 4 as well. So he was a very talented director as well. And you put together a good story with a good cast and a good director, and you have a masterpiece. So I did go back and timestamp the Klingon scenes. I did watch the movie. I did rent it off of I bought a copy off of Amazon Prime because, well, there are no more VCRs. So those VHS cassettes are somewhere. But we first see the Klingons in this movie after the Enterprise and Captain Kirk are introduced around 8 minutes and 34 seconds. So Val Chris is in a freighter somewhere in outer space with the Genesis plans. Okay, so after Star Trek II, various rogue parties have gotten a hold of the Genesis plans, and those rogue parties are studying those plans, and they see it as an ultimate weapon that could be used and against the other races of the Alpha Quadrant. And she obtained some plans for Commander Krug. So she's in a freighter with some other humanoids, a human captain, and he says, well, where is he? What is he doing? And Valkyris turns on the communicator, and she says, Commander Krug, we are here. And then she utters the words, Kabla der Gerida Able Ju Dabe. Okay. And then at that point, we hear the raspy voice. We hear Commander Krug open up his communicator and say, "Well done, Valkyris. Well done." And then the captain on Valkyris' ship says, What the hell's going on here? And then you hear the words, Showay, Echu, ha. And then all of a sudden, you see the big bird of prey decloak above Valkyris's freighter. Okay. And so Commander Krug, he's on the bridge with his gang, his crew, and he's got his little dog there, which looks kind of like the one of the dogs from John Carpenter's The Thing. And he gives the command, der li now, start the transmission now. Okay, and he goes down to Malta's station, who's got the receiver. He's got a little cassette plugged in there, and they're watching the Genesis infomercial there with Captain Kirk now instead of Dr. Carol Marcus. Valkyris says the words, Jaber Per Ali. Okay. And then Commander Krug pulls out his cassette, looks at it like, yeah, I got the Genesis. I have the Genesis infomercial there. And then she says, Ku Bateli Tubej, which basically is saying that, you will enjoy this. It's a very good presentation. And then Commander Krug looks, in surprise, and he says, Vash Talepu, you've watched this? And then Valkyris says, Ihla Jawi. Yes, I have. And she knows when she says that, she's in trouble. And then Commander Krug says, what does he say? He says, Zoha, which basically means that's unfortunate. And then Valkyris says, Jayarsh, I understand. Okay. So she knows that in telling him that, she's sealed her doom and the other members of her crew. So Krug takes his little cassette there, goes back to his chair, and then he utters the words, Chui da. So in other words, let's get out of here. So then you see the bird of prey. It takes off. It jettisons off, and then it starts to turn around. And then Valkyris says, Kapla Jawi, Bungwishi, success, my love, basically. And then Commander Krug says, the Kalu Tong, you will be remembered with honor. Okay. And then a few seconds later, we get the very first bah of the movie. And those who know Klingon know that bah means fire. And so as the bird of prey approaches the freighter, the wings come down, and then the phasers aim at the ship and blow the ship to bits, and then they jettison off. Now, as the bird of prey is jettisoning off, Commander Krug takes his cassette. He's walking off the bridge. He's walking away from his chair, and he says, which I believe is set course for the neutral zone. Okay. And then he hears a growl in the background, which is his doggy, his pooch. He turns around, walks back out, looks at his dog, and then looks at the gunner, and he says, "You jet." Let me put it at the camera. And then he says, "You jet, feed him." Okay. And then the gunner is like, and he says, "Look, Jaquet." "Yes, sir." And then the dog growls. And so there's some trepidation there about feeding the dog. But that's that first scene. And I hope I got all the lines right there. So by 50 minutes, Commander Krug and Torg and Maltz, they have watched the Genesis infomercial, now starring Captain Kirk. I'm sorry, Admiral Kirk instead of Carol Marcus. And Commander Krug says, well, we're going to Genesis. We're going to obtain these secrets for our people. So around 50 minutes, the USS Grissom is already there with David and Savick. David and Savick have beamed down to identify what the life form is. It turns out to be Mr. Spock, who was regenerated by the Genesis wave. And as they're coordinating with Captain Esteban and the Grissom about what to do, Commander Krug and his bird of prey, they decloak. And Commander Krug sees the Grissom, and he's eyeing his prey, and he barks out, "Atak, dosh, jota, dech." Okay, so he's saying this to his gunner, and his gunner's got his back turned, and he's taking aim at the Grissom. And what Commander Krug said was, "Target the engine, gunner. I want prisoners." Okay, this is the same gunner who just had to feed his dog reluctantly. So the gunner's looking, and it's funny when you watch the movie over again, you can see the gunner with this focused, blank look, and then Commander Krug lets out the second, bah, okay, fire. And then when you watch the movie again, you can see the gunner, you could hear him click the button, okay, and the bird of prey, this time instead of phasers, fires a photon torpedo, and it except it destroys the Grissom. And then it's funny because you can see the bird of prey kind of fly away over the Grissom, exploding. But instead of destroying the engine so that Commander Krug could have his prisoners, the gunner destroyed the whole ship. So Krug looks at him and he says, "Come up, poo, shotene. I wanted prisoners. You destroyed the whole ship. What are you doing?" And then the gunner turns around, who had to feed his dog, and he says, "Fashta, kach." Lucky shot, sir. So he got a little snarky with Commander Krug. So Commander Krug pulls out his blaster, and he vaporizes him. Okay. And it's funny when you watch that scene, the Klingon next to the gunner, now the deceased gunner, he just kind of turns around while his colleague is getting vaporized. I thought that was kind of odd. If your colleague is getting vaporized like that, then you probably have more of a reaction. But these are Klingons, and he just kind of turned and looked like this and went on with his business. So that was that next scene. So around 53:41, 53 minutes and 41 seconds into the movie, Commander Krug and two of his crewmen beamed down to Genesis because Torg pointed out, "Oh, if you want prisoners, there are 3 life signs on the surface." And so they find Captain Spock's photon tube, and they find these big old Genesis worms there. And Commander Krug is feeling a little daring, so he hands his communicator or his blaster to his henchman, and he picks up the worm. I wouldn't have done that. And it starts to try to choke him, and he strangles it and bleeds it to death and throws it on the ground. And then he tells Torg and the others, "Mer Pader Kashwe Rakuk." There's not much going on down here, and that's when it on Genesis, the nighttime descends on everybody pretty quickly. So that was that scene. So there's not much going on here. We don't have much to report. There was one more Klingon word uttered in this scene. Immediately after vaporizing his gunner, Commander Krug uttered the words "Hakdakbach" with disgust. The translation was, or should I say, is animal. So he called his gunner an animal after destroying the USS Grissom. Commander Krug wanted those prisoners, and he looked at his gunner's actions with disgust. So by 59 minutes, Kirk, Scotty, McCoy, Chekhov, and Sulu, they've stolen the Enterprise. My favorite Enterprise. That's a brilliant sequence there. And they've arrived in the Genesis sector. And so while Krug and his two henchmen are on the surface, Torg and Maltz are in charge of the bird of prey. And they show it as the Enterprise enters the sector. They show the bird of prey flying in the outer orbit of Genesis, playing that Klingon music. I love that scene. That's some cool Klingon music. And then they cut to Torg and Maltz, and Maltz says, "Vessel entering sector," and Torg says, "Federation battle cruiser. Have they scanned us?" And Maltz says, "Not yet." And he says, and then Torg yells out, "Joey, you too!" Engage the cloaking device, and then the bird of prey cloaks. So around 1 hour and 1 minute, the Enterprise enters the Genesis sector, okay, and they arrive in orbit of Genesis, and the bird of prey is cloaked. And so Torg tells Commander Krug, even though you told me not to interrupt you, there's another Federation ship. And Commander Krug says, "Whoa, beam me up, bring me up." Okay. And on the next scene for the Klingons, Commander Krug is beamed up, and he storms into the bridge, throws his vest, and says, "Fight your hole!" Battle stations on screen. What do we have here? And then Torg briefs them. Federation ship is closing on impulse power range, 5,000 kilocams, and Kruger's like, "Good. This is just a turn of luck I've been waiting for." And so you have these two ships about to battle. One sees the other doesn't, even though Kirk and crew see that blurry area in space, and they eventually suspect that it's a cloaked ship. But as the bird of prey is closing in on the Enterprise, or should I say as they're closing in on each other, Maltz is counting down the kilocams, 5,000 kilocams, 4,000 kilocams. And then he eventually tells Krug, "Firing range, sir." So this is like old school submarine battleship type stuff. And so Krug looks down at his new gunner, gunner number 2, and he says, "Bakwi," in that raspy voice. He says, "Bakwi, stern look. Bakwi. Dosh himosh ukner yata." Just target the engine. And the gunner looks at him and he says, "Yazju Gal." Understood. Okay. And then Krug looks back up. Okay. And they get closer and closer and closer. And Maltz says, 1.5 kilograms. That's the way it sounds. I'm not sure if that's the actual human number, but he says 1.5 kilograms. And then Krug says, "Sai hoosh, Joa." And he looks back up. Okay. And he's really, really into this. He's about to catch another Federation ship. So the bird of prey decloaks. Scotty gets off 2 photon torpedoes. Sends the bird of prey for a little whirl. The Bureaumation systems overload on the Enterprise, so they can't do anything. Scotty's 2 torpedoes basically kill Krug's dog. Okay, so he's furious. His Klingon eyebrows are pointed like this. Emergency power to the thrusters. Enterprise is defenseless. The bird of prey comes back about. And then we get our final bah for the movie. And Christopher Lloyd Krug said that one with a lot of feeling. Bah, almost hitting the side of his seat. And that photon torpedo knocked out the automation center of my favorite Enterprise. And that was effectively the kill shot. Kirk and crew, there's nothing they could do, so they tried to bluff with Krug, And Krug called his bluff and said, look, you're going to give me Genesis. I have prisoners on the surface. And if you don't give me Genesis, I'm going to kill them one by one. So he lets, Kirk talk to Savick and David and Spock. He doesn't have his Katra, so he's just there in body, but not spirit. And David says Genesis doesn't work. I can't believe they'd kill us for it. And Krug says, oh, you're mistaken. I assure you that I will. And then he says, all right, that's enough talk. Okay. And he says, in Klingon, Kirk is listening, and he says, puts his little receiver there on his chair, and he says, Yaho, Dejach Bay. Kill one of the prisoners. I don't care which, just kill one. And his sergeant on the ground walks by Spock, walks by Savick, walks by David, settles on Savick. Spock's staring off into space. Savick is looking on with no emotion. And David sees those two things pop out on the blade. He's about to shank Savick. And then David steps in and meets his unfortunate demise. That was a very brutal scene, especially when you hear that blade go into David's gut. And Merritt Buttrick, he acted that out very, very well. Like the shock of having that blade go through his gut. It was a very unfortunate way to die. And then, so at that point, Kirk is, grieving the death of his son, and the only option he has left is to destroy my favorite Enterprise. I don't think I ever forgave the writers for destroying that Enterprise. That was my favorite Enterprise. They did come back with the NC-107. No, the NC-1701-A in Star Trek 4, 5, and 6, but it wasn't the same. That bridge for the original refit Enterprise, it was cozy. It had the nice cushy seats. It was kind of, the ambiance was kind of dark and traditional and classic, and I never forgave them for destroying that Enterprise. Anyway, Kirk tells Krug, we'll surrender our vessel. You guys can beam over. And Krug tells Torg, yeah, you guys beam over. We're going to take over the vessel. But Torg says, sir, we are outnumbered. This is not a good idea, And Krug says, we're Klingons. We can do it. So what? They outnumber us hundreds to 20. We're Klingons. Okay. So Torg reluctantly leads the crew over there as they're exiting the bridge. They all have their trench coats on and their blasters. Commander Krug turns around to them casually and says, Jolpa Gija. Kupla. Success. Kupla is success. Go and do it for the Empire and success. So we know what happens then. They beam over. They beam over to the Enterprise. It's on self-destruct, and he loses most of his crew, aside from himself and Maltz, there on the ship. So that was the pep talk. And then around 1 hour and 21 minutes, we get our final Klingon lines of the movie. Okay, the Enterprise has been destroyed. Kirk and his crew, they're on the Genesis planet. Spock has aged back to where he's supposed to be. And then he baits Commander Krug. I have Genesis down here, but you have to come down here to get it. So then Commander Krug beams down. Okay. And he issues a command to Maltz up on the ship. He says, Maltz, Joey Chu, activate the transporter. At that point, he beams up Savick, Scotty, Sulu, McCoy, and Chekhov. And that's when Kirk and Krug go through their final negotiation, and somehow he thinks Kirk has the secrets to Genesis in his head or maybe in another device, and they fight to the death. And William Shatner takes a couple of hits, and he does his oh, and he finally kills Krug by kicking him into the lava pit as the planet's destroying itself. So it's Kirk and Spock on the planet's surface, and then he picks up Krug's communicator. He heard what Krug said to Maltz, and he says, "Maltz, Joey Chu." With all the destruction going on, I guess Maltz couldn't determine whether or not that was Krug or Kirk. He couldn't read the life signs to determine whether or not that was a human or a Klingon. And he beams Kirk up to the bird of prey, and then they take over the bird of prey, and they head off to Vulcan. But that was the last Klingon line in the movie. So those were my first lessons in hearing and learning Klingon. Okay, and we heard we heard more Klingon in The Next Generation and in Deep Space Nine, and I didn't watch Voyager extensively, but from that point on, we heard more Klingon. But Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, that was the first time that we all, myself included, and probably you too if you're a Trekkie, those were our first extensive lessons in Klingon. Prayer, Mr. Savick. Klingons don't take prisoners. So what about you? Were you into the original Star Trek movies? Some are unfortunately predicting that, like a lot of our other classic franchises, Star Trek itself might be on its deathbed, but we'll always have the original crew, the original movies, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. Will always have the original lore similar to Star Wars. So the people in charge of Hollywood and Paramount and whoever is in charge of media now, they'll never be able to take those away from us. But did you grow up with the original movies, the TV series? Did you enjoy Star Trek 3? Were you more into the Next Generation movies? Were you more into Deep Space Nine? Did you learn Klingon? Did you watch those movies ad nauseum like I did? And did you learn Klingon or some Vulcan as well? Okay, let me know what you think in the comments section below. Hey all, before I wrap this video up, I just want to do some quick advertising. I am a self-published author. This is my book, The Engineers, A Western New York Basketball Story, Part 1, Innocent Basketball Dreams. It is a real life story about what sports teach you about life as a young person. And this is my first book. And yeah, I actually mentioned in here that before I got interested in the great game of basketball, I was a Star Trek kid, among other things, in the beginning. Okay, so the story actually starts out like that. For you watching in Viewerland, I am selling signed hardcover copies and signed paperback copies here out of my studio. The hardcover, I'm selling that for $27, and the paperback, I'm selling that for $22. Just leave your information just use one of the payment methods in the description box below: Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle. Or you can go to my Big Words Authors store if you would like to use plastic. This book is also available on Amazon in the ebook, hardcover, and paperback editions. It's on Ingram Spark in the paperback editions, but all at full price. If you have Amazon points, you could probably knock the price down, but it is also available there as well. Consider getting yourself a copy if you like to read, or consider getting a copy for someone else, a young person in particular, who could use a good story. But this is a story for everybody. Yes, so I'm going to wrap this up. So this was my video discussing how I first learned Klingon and what my first lessons in Klingon were and who taught me those lessons. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. Did you does this experience, is this experience consistent with yours out there in viewerland? Let me know. Once again, this is Big Discussions 76, entertainment and media. Please like, share, and subscribe. Look out for the next one whenever that is. It's a very, very busy life. So as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Always try to do your best. Take care, and I will talk to you the next time. I normally end my Star Trek retrospectives with "Live long and prosper," but since this was primarily a Klingon video, I'm going to end it with "Kupla." Much success to you. All right, take care. Bye-bye.